Okay, if anybody's new here, my name is Richard Moss, spelling's M-O-S-S. I come in from Long Prairie every month to be with these sessions. I happen to have the title of Minnesota MUFON State Director and enjoy every minute of it. This is an important day. Ted Phillips is an investigator who looks for physical evidence. He is considered to be the trace case expert in the world when it comes to UFOs. He doesn't just go around like a lot of us do and talk to people that say they saw this. He's not repeating stories. This is evidential material. A person like Ted is probably somebody that an agnostic skeptic would not want to try to confront, because he has lots and lots and lots of evidence if people want to hear it. And you're here today, so I guess you want to hear it. I've seen him on the History Channel twice, at least twice, on a couple of their programs. The last time I saw Ted was quite a few years ago, and I can't remember where we were at, but Bud Hopkins had rented a motel room up on one of the upper floors. And that was back in the days when Linda Cortile, who was supposedly abducted with her children right out the window of their high-rise apartment into a craft, which then proceeded to dive down into, I think it was the East River or the West River, someplace in New York City. Ted and I happened to be in the room. We sat down and started talking. We were exchanging some things back and forth. There were a lot of people there. And that's the last time I've seen him, so it's good to meet up with him again. Hasn't changed much. I've been asked to request that you do not. We're going to save question and answers at the end, so please do not interrupt with questions during the, write them down if you'd like, and we'll have a question and answer session when this is over. So ladies and gentlemen, a real treat for us today, Mr. Ted Phillips. Come on up.
Thank you.
Welcome aboard.
Thanks. Well, good afternoon. About this time yesterday, I was in Denver in the middle of a snowstorm, watching them de-ice the plane. I actually hate to fly to begin with, so that wasn't too pleasant. But you guys have done well. You've got some great weather. This is good. As a matter of fact, I live in the Branson, Missouri area, and my wife was telling me this morning the high there will be 41 and heavy rain. So, and I was a little leery of coming this far north the way this weather's been going. So, in 1998, I decided to get back into the UFO business after about 9 years of being out of it. One of the very best friends I've ever had in my life, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, died in 1986. And honestly, all of a sudden, it wasn't as much fun as it used to be. And you kind of miss a guy like Allen calling you from the filming site of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, all excited about how real these little guys looked in the day's shooting. And so I decided I'd had enough of it and got out. And in 98, my wife kept reminding me that I had promised Allen that I would finish investigating the Delphos, Kansas case. And I had pretty well done that, except I had never produced a complete report on it. So finally I did get that done, And I think the MUFON and the Fund for UFO Research are selling that now, the Delphos report, which is truly a classic case. And I was so fortunate down through so many years to get really great cases, and some of the best cases that have been around at all. And so I thought, well, I'll throw together again a group of people that are interested in exchanging data on physical trace landing cases. And one of the first people that I talked with, Jacques Vallée, told me, he said, "Ted, you'll be greatly disappointed when you get back into this and see how the climate has changed." And little did I know what he was talking about. And that is the fact that it's sometimes very difficult to get information from another investigator's case. And I've never been one to want that person's case, just the data. So we don't have gaping holes in our information. And it's a little different mindset. And there, unfortunately, are fewer people that are willing to get out and crawl around in the hog pens and recoup some of the materials that are left by these things. But nevertheless, it is moving ahead. And I have to mention that there is now a search engine dedicated exclusively to UFO research, and it's called UFO Crawler. And it was developed by IBM and Olaf Phillips, which is, I think, a good name. And Olaf is one of a group of computer whizzes in Silicon Valley that are really seriously interested in getting at some answers. And of course, they're looking at it in the way they should be, and that is, what kind of new technology are we ignoring? And so consequently, we're hoping that perhaps some funding will come out of that. Joe Firmage gave me a great deal of funding back in '99 through about 2001, when the computer business took a little bit of a downturn. But now I live down in the Ozarks, and always one watching for a more substantial site for the center. I got a great deal on this. So who knows what it'll look like shortly. And this guy is my animal reaction specialist. He's an old English sheepdog, and as you can see, he loves my race car. And I have for years, and still do, drive midgets like this and sprint cars. It's a great way to focus. You focus or you die. Now, this is a photograph of my first meeting with Alan Hynek at his home in Chicago in 1968. And it was at this point that he suggested that I start specializing in physical trace cases because, after all, they involved evidence, and that's what we needed. One of my favorite photos of Alan, this was taken at Piedmont, Missouri, and I'm not sure who the sign refers to. But this was Alan in his Men in Black mode. And this is a guy that we should never, ever forget about, because he was the man. He knew more about this subject than anyone living today. And this was my pet raccoon. He loved animals. This is Alan with Sir Eric Gary, who was the leader of Grenada, and the lady sitting there was Miss World of 1970, his secretary. And this is at the United Nations. We were asked to go there and meet with the Secretary General and the General Assembly in an attempt to get a global investigation of UFOs initiated. And unfortunately, Sir Eric was a bit far out in a lot of his statements. And this is Gordon Cooper, one of the original 7 astronauts, and I. This was a man that you would enjoy spending an evening with, just listening to stories, and I do mean funny stories. This is Jacques Vallée and Alan and Dr. Claude Poher. Claude was the first director of the French official UFO project, and I talked to him, for example, the Valençol, France case, which is one that always intrigued me. Daylight, the farmer sees a couple little guys and an object sitting on the ground, and one of the little guys walks up to within 35 feet of him. He's immobilized, and the witness said that he could see in the eyes of this little guy a lot of what seemed to be concern for his awkward position, meaning the witness, because not being able to move or say anything. And I asked Claude, who had investigated this, and the French group had thoroughly investigated the case, what do you think? What do you think about this case? And he said, it's real and it happened. And then suddenly one morning, Claude just sort of sailed off into the sunset with his family, and no one heard from him for a long, long time. And about 4 months ago, I got an email from him, and he's back. So he is a person that will do a lot of good. Now, this is a photo of Alan and I not far from here, back in 1975, Medford, Minnesota. And this is a case that hasn't had a lot of recognition. There was a landing site. There were 25 witnesses. It chased cars. Cars chased it. It landed on the high school football field. And Lorna had not even heard of Medford, which I can understand. I can only remember it was quite a drive, I think, south of here. But it's a good case, and not much has been said about it. Okay, so in the physical trace cases, the objects that land, as you can see, there's pretty substantial variety of these things, and they do quite a number of things. But statistically, there are some very easy to spot patterns. Landing sites, somewhat varied, but you find in the statistics that the 3 primary types of landing sites, the effects are either the material is burnt, depressed, or dehydrated. And obviously dehydration is one of the more interesting things that's found in these sites. Depression I'm familiar with. This is a landing site in Brazil, and another beautiful site from Iowa. Farmers saw a bright circular white object hovering over this portion of his field, and the next morning he went out on his ATV and he found this thing, and inside the area there are 8 imprints where something, landing gear, whatever, had gone into the ground. They were all of the same size and configuration. 24% of the 3,189 trace landing cases involve guys like these. And again, there's a pretty good variety. But they have one thing in common: they are all 3 to 3.5 feet tall. Now, this is the first landing case I investigated. It was way back in 1967, Tuscumbia, Missouri. 64-year-old farmer, Claude Edwards, was just after sunrise going down to the barn to take care of his cattle. And as he walked towards the barn, he noted that all the cattle were looking at one spot out in the field. As he reached the barn, he looked out and he saw this thing sitting about 160 feet from him over a couple of fences out in the brightly sunlit field. So he put the cattle feed into the barn, checked, made sure that the door was locked, and started over the fences. And I remember so well, it took me about 3.5 months to locate this man because he'd not told anyone about the event except his brother. His brother had a little too much to drink one night, and he told some other people. And 3.5 months later, I finally located Claude. And he really didn't want to talk about it. He wanted no publicity. So why make up a big lie and not tell anyone? And as a matter of fact, he was quite clear in saying that he didn't care if I believed it or if I didn't. He didn't believe in the things before he saw this. He said, but it was there. So at any rate, this is an aerial image showing the house, the barn he walked down to, and the position of the object. And this was his position looking out at those two fences. And the X indicates the location of the object. As he climbed over the first fence, he said, I bent down and I picked up 2 rocks, pretty good size. And as I climbed over the second fence, his determination was to knock a hole in this thing, keep it on the ground for proof. Underneath the object, there were several little critters, and they were moving very rapidly underneath. They were moving underneath the object, and he could see what looked like levers or arms which were moving very rapidly. And they seemed to be mechanical rather than some life form. And they had a sort of snout that came out and large eyes. They were the same color as the object, which was gray-green. And this was as he approached that first fence. And the camera is located at the near point that he reached, and he's standing where the object was at. And he walked up to within 15 feet of this thing, and he encountered an invisible force. He really couldn't feel it. There was no sound. It was just there, and he couldn't get through it. So he pushes around and goes through all this, and finally he backs up about 8 feet, tosses one of the rocks directly at the thing, and 15 feet from the object it hits this and bounces back into the field. So he tries to toss one in from the top, thinking, well, maybe there's a hole in this, whatever it is. And the rock hit something above the object and skipped, he said, like a stone on water out into the field. Well, the thing sat there. Now, this is how the little critters appeared. And with him standing about 20 feet from it in daylight, suddenly the thing moves back and forth 3 times on the central shaft it's sitting on. And on the third time, it silently takes to the air. The cylinder's pulled up flush with the base of the object, and it flies away towards St. Elizabeth, Missouri, with absolutely no sound. And the sight was like this. The central cylinder had gone into the ground, and as I was later to find, just like the Valensol France case, after the cylinder, the shaft had gone into the ground and reached its maximum depth, something had came out to perhaps stabilize it, but came out of the cylinder. So the base of this shaft was actually larger than the area from that point on up. And obviously, when it ascended, this was pulled back in, the shaft slid out of this. But the soil, as you can see, was just absolutely dehydrated. And there had been substantial rain in that area. So it was a good case, and this guy was totally credible. Now, the case that I always have to at least go over, Delphos, Kansas. This thing was stationary about 5 feet above the ground, and it was ablaze with various colors of light, not lights, not light sources, but lights. And Ron Johnson said that it looked as though there were throws of flames coming off of it at points. From the base of this thing, there dropped down 4 feet a shimmering mist, very brightly glowing and shimmering, and it stopped a foot above the ground. Below that, on the ground, over a period of 4 or 5 minutes, he saw forming a grayish steam or fog in a circle. And this would turn out later to conform to the landing site, or I should say near landing. And he stood there and watched this thing from a distance of about 35 feet for an undetermined period of time. And that's one of the frustrations of this case, as with many. He will not describe anything that he may have seen outside of the object, or what went on that he can recollect for this period of time. To him, it was about 5 minutes. His parents watched a 30-minute TV program and half of another, so it was at least 45 minutes. And as he stood there, the glow began to brighten. This area underneath began to brighten and expand, and it came off the ground slightly, moved down behind a hog shed, and then ascended over the hog shed, disappearing to the south. The sound changed as it started to ascend from a rough noise. He always equated it to an old washing machine that was out of balance. As it started to move, it became a high-pitched sound like a jet. And as it started to move, as it reached about the area of the hog shed, he went blind. He had no vision at all. And I asked him many, many times, did you see like spots of light, like if you had a flash go off in your face? He said, no, it was black. I couldn't see anything, but he could hear the object's sound moving away. And this is the location of the object relative to the hog shed. A tree was knocked down along the flight path, 7-inch diameter tree. A tree limb was broken, which had originally extended out over the site and was broken down at a point 8.5 feet above the ground. Now, as this thing flew away, he regained his vision. He ran to the house, told his parents what had happened. They ran outside, and they saw the object in the southern sky moving away with no sound. And I have found a number of confirming witnesses. A farmer who was sitting on his porch saw an object come into the Johnson farm prior to the time that they came back home that evening, and then saw the thing. Another gentleman across the road was plowing his field, and he saw an object come out of the Johnson farm and down into his field, and he was only about 40 feet from it, and he said it was kind of scooting along the field like it was having trouble becoming airborne. And one of my pet theories is that the object went into this very restricted area because it had to. That what he was seeing in this shimmering spray that changed the soil forever was this thing downloading something it had to download. Reduced mass, who knows? This is a tree that was knocked down on the thing's way in, the tree limb that was broken at 8.5 feet. And after the object disappeared to the south, the family ran back into the home, and Ron said, "Mom, do you have any film in the camera?" Well, of course, the only camera they had was a very cheap Polaroid, but better than nothing. And they had one negative left in this thing, or I should say positive. And so they went out to the site, and it was pitch black. There's no lighting out there at all. And as they walked out into this area, they see this glowing 8-foot ring of soil. And I asked Irma, could you see the camera well enough from the glow of this thing, trying to determine how bright it was, to make adjustments to take the picture. And she said, Ted, you could have read a newspaper by this thing. It was that bright. Portions nearby trees that were a foot and a half from the ring, were also glowing. The area along its flight path, which is forward towards the camera, also had a fainter glow, and up the back of the shed and the roof of the shed it had flown over also was glowing. So she took this photograph. This was taken within 5-6 minutes of the ascent of a UFO. And this is the only case that I'm aware of where the site was photographed that quickly. I have the camera. This is the camera that they used. I did a lot of experimenting with the very same type film, trying to duplicate what she had shot. And this is a ring of flour that I made. And I tried photographing it, of course, under full moon conditions, without a flash, nothing. You couldn't see anything at all. And that film was pretty slow anyway. And so then I would shoot flash pictures, and as you can see, the effect, totally different. Now, Phil Klass, I'm sure all of you are familiar with Phil, was really interested in the Delphos case. I spent more hours on the phone with Klass on this than I ever would want to remember. And one of his explanations, he went from one to the other, was a fairy ring. And obviously that looks just like that, doesn't it? Or like that. And this is 3 years and 6 months after the event took place. So that was theory 3666. The next one being the circular feeder, which really beat anything that Phil ever came up with. He said what had happened was the Johnsons had put a circular feeder in this area where the ring was at. Now, he didn't bother to learn that this was what they call a shelter belt. They had hog pens fenced off on the south side. The north side had a row of trees, but no fence. Well, his theory was that they would let the animals in to feed at this circular feeder. And as they were feeding, of course, as animals will do, they get excited and they'd stamp their little feet. Well, this made the ring. And what he hadn't bothered to look at was I shot elevations across the ring in several attitudes, and the ring surface was actually raised from the balance of soil. But nevertheless, they stamped their little feet, and of course then they had to urinate. So that's why the soil looked odd. That's why nothing would grow there. Of course, he didn't pay any attention to the fact that Phyllis Budinger and Earl Farouk in 2 different laboratories determined that there was no measurable trace of uric acid in this soil. That's easy to overlook. One laboratory that we had some luck with for analysis was Oak Ridge. And the director of the Orion project at Oak Ridge was a personal, longtime friend of Alan's. And they were becoming very excited about this soil. This is a electron transmission microscopic image, and you can see that sort of hazy stuff around the edges. That is the coating that makes this soil so unusual. This is a higher magnification, and they found these things that they called icicle structures, and no one at Oak Ridge had ever seen anything like it. And I always assumed they had some pretty bright guys down there. And it was at just this point that we received a letter from the director of the Orion project saying that due to a change in management, Oak Ridge would no longer be able to work with this material. Of course, they didn't send it back to us either. Now, this is, to me, a truly remarkable case. This took place only about 35 miles from where I live. And one morning at sunrise, 7 members of this farm family look out into the field, and they see this white sort of elliptical object sitting there. And the field is brightly lit, sun's up, and they thought, well, it's a piece of metal or cardboard that's blown in overnight. Well, as they continued to watch this thing just off and on as they had breakfast, 2 hours later, the farmer decided that he and his son would go down to a barn and get the tractor and pull this thing out of the field. And as they reached the barn, the remainder of the family standing on the front porch, and suddenly the object jumped 10 feet straight up and became stationary and then started moving at an angle toward the house with no sound. And this is what it looked like. And they could see that this thing was turning. And about every 2 seconds, a dark section would come into view and would become light again and dark. And as this object ascended, the father and his son at the tractor barn heard all of the rest of the people screaming and ran out from behind the barn and saw the object ascending from an angle like this, while the rest of them were up here. And the witness location, as you can see over there, the flight path, the interesting thing is that this object was only about 3 feet in diameter. And there were no visible wings, no engines, no method of propulsion, no sound. And yet, as this little thing was ascending, it made a turn to the right, a sharp turn to the left, both across the wind, and then flew against the wind as it was flying on out. So obviously it was a powered something. And you can see right at the foreground of the end of the flight path, the site, which was 3 feet and conformed. And this is the ascent and wind pattern. Now this is a photograph taken of the site within minutes, about 30 minutes, by a deputy sheriff. And the 2 bright areas are really interesting. In these areas, they're sort of little craters. And the soil in those areas is so dry. I mean, it is sand dry. And as you'll notice, to the foreground and to the side, bull nettle plants, which have pretty good sized leaves. And they were at the edge of the site. As this stuff was thrusted out of these 2 little craters, the dust landed on the leaves, and because of some sort of heating, the leaves closed up, and I found all these nice dust samples hidden inside the leaves. So there was heating of some kind. We did a thermoluminescence analysis, and it indicated a slight radiation, not much, very slight, and a heating temperature of about 2,000 degrees. That was done by Ed Zeller at the Space Technology Lab. Now this is a sketch of the site and the arrangement. The 2 little craters at the bottom, and then there was a third that made a triangular pattern in which the grass was twisted very tightly in a clockwise rotation. And the grass outside of this area, right along the edge, was a purple hue. And that's the site marked off. 2 little craters. Now this is the case that connected me with J. Allen Hynek. This happened in 1966. And as UFO cases you'll find as you investigate reports, and those of you that have done this for a number of years have ran into it. It's quite difficult to come up with the witness, because most witnesses in the really good cases don't want any publicity. They're not wanting to talk about it publicly. And such it was with this one. I learned of this from my brother-in-law, who was in a barber shop 2 years after this happened, heard one of the barbers talking to another guy about a guy who had photographed a flying saucer. So the brother-in-law slyly asked a few questions and got enough information then that I found that the photographer was a teacher in Springfield, Missouri, and now he's very high in state government and for sure doesn't want any publicity. But the gist of the story is that he and two of his friends were deer hunting, and it was about 10 o'clock in the morning. There were high, thin clouds, very little wind, and a guy walked past them, and he had came up from the area of their campsite, and they asked him how the campsite, everything okay? And he said, yeah, fine. Within 15 minutes, they started back to their campsite, and as they were approaching it, they saw a column of white smoke coming up. And when they reached the campsite, they found everything. They had a like 12 by 15 foot tent. The tent totally burned up. Everything inside of the tent was burnt. Aluminum cots were melted, but the aluminum poles that supported the tent on the outside were not even scorched. And over the tent itself, a lot of dry leaves. This was in the late fall, and nothing burned. It was a very direct method of heating. And as they're standing there going through what was left of their $600 worth of camping gear, they heard a humming sound. They looked out into a valley, and they saw ascending from that valley this object. And one of the primary witness in the group of three always carried a twin lens reflex camera around his neck to shoot wildlife while they were out. So he grabs the camera up and he takes this shot and very nearly missed the object. It was starting to gain speed. He cranked the film forward, shot a second one, and it is just badly, badly blurred as it was really picking up speed. Now you can see quite a bit of detail. There is a raised area on the front. This cylindrical structure on the back, which has coming out of it what looks like an antenna or some kind of something fairly thin coming out of the top. So they paced off the distance to the point where this object came out of the field. At the time the photo was taken, it was about 300 feet away. And so Alan and I called Alan because this was far too good just for me to put in a file and forget. So I thought, well, I'll try to get into to the man. And strangely enough, he actually answered my call, talked with me, and I described the case to him, and he said, I'll be down in 2 weeks. Can we meet with these people? So I arranged that. So he and I met with them. They gave us the negatives, which were in the middle of a roll, and they had woodsy sort of shots on each side of the UFO pictures. And he took the negatives back to Northwestern University, where they were thoroughly gone over by some photographic experts, and they determined to the best of their ability that the negatives were genuine. It was not a double exposure. They'd not been altered. And the interesting thing was that on a 120 negative, the actual size of the UFO image was 1/4 of an inch. And that's pretty substantial, that we could get more like that. And I have found 4 other cases where very similar objects have been seen, and in 3 cases photographed. So if any of you guys run across anything that looks like that, please let me know. Now, 15 feet from where they were standing in the campsite, there was a tree. The object came up from behind this tree, and actually in the preceding photo, the full frame, you can see the very top of this tree. And it was burning. The top foot of the tree was still burning. So evidently, you surmise the object was coming in, and a beam let's call it a beam, comes by, strikes the top of the tree, igniting it in a very concentrated area of heat, then destroys the camping equipment. This is the campsite. You can see the outer tent pole standing. You can see the close proximity and overhang of the tree leaves. And believe me, those things would have ignited instantly. So it's a very interesting case, especially having an actual photo of the object. Now, in 1974, Alan sent me to Langenburg, Saskatchewan, to investigate this case. Edwin Fear, 42-year-old, very well-to-do farmer. The last thing he needed was to have thousands of people trample his rapeseed crop by making up a story. Edwin was out on his swather, 10 o'clock in the morning. It was a Sunday morning, and there was a low cloud ceiling, and it was drizzling rain lightly. As he approached a slough, which was a raised area with very high grass around the outer edges, he sees an object like this sitting in the high grass. And his first impression is his brother-in-law has carried some sort of goose blind in there. So he stops the swather 50 feet from this thing, and he gets off of it, and he walks across the rapeseed up onto the slough, and as he comes up onto the slough on the elevation with this thing, it's 15 feet away. And again, this is daylight. And he sees that the thing is spinning rapidly. And in that spin, he can see darker grooves in the surface material. He can see a wide band around the base of it, and he can't see the very bottom because of the high grass. But where it's sitting in the high grass spinning, the grass is moving violently around. So he becomes frightened, backs up to the swather, gets back up on the seat, and looks out, and he sees four more objects. And they're all the same size, same shape, same color. They're all spinning. Grass is moving under each. Out of object number 2, there are 2 rod-like extensions coming out in sort of a V. And the rods are turning like this, and the grass is turning there. And you'll see the result of that. And so he's sitting there wanting to leave, but he can't move. I mean, this man was terror-stricken. Suddenly, the objects ascended in a step formation like this, and from underneath, he could see on each object 2 vent-like extensions. And as they were gaining altitude, suddenly there was a plume from each of these tubes on each of the objects of a gray material about 6 feet long, exhaust, that came down, and his hat was blown off of his head. There was no sound at any point. As the objects continued to ascend, at the base of the clouds they stopped, they formed a perfect line and hovered for a few seconds and disappeared into the clouds. Now at this point, Edwin was really scared. And he decided if he sat there for 5 minutes and they didn't come back, they were not coming back. So they didn't. He gets off the swather and he walks over into the slough. And there he found, these are 2 of the rings. He found 5 rings where each of the objects had been. And I think I have, this is a head-on shot of ring number 2 where the probes came out. And you can see there are 2 little trails coming out in a V configuration. And when I went up there, by the time I got there, an estimated 6,000 people had gone through the rapeseed crop. So there was not much left of the rings. Luckily, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police had launched a very thorough investigation, and a Constable Moyer was the man in charge. And he gave me all the photographs. They had taken magnificent shots of the whole area and the rings and so on the day after it happened, so they were very visible. And he told me that they tried rolling a tractor tire into this slough so they could roll it in and drop it and maybe make one of these things. Well, he said, no way could you do that because it would leave obvious marks and a trail when you rolled it in. And Edwin was a person of very high repute in the area, and Moyer said that it was his determination that whatever made these rings came out of the air and left the same way. So unfortunately, no analysis was ever done on the material I brought back. And that happened occasionally. And it happened primarily because people, the center was undergoing some changes, and there were some folks that weren't as interested as Alan in getting at some of the physical stuff, and actually kept some of it from him. Right now, I'm investigating a site in Missouri which has been ongoing since 1998. And this is what I call Site 3. There are 3 ranches or farms in a relatively small area where these events have been taking place. Physical trace events, aerial displays, landings, unseen force that does a great deal of damage. And this is the first place that I've actually seen stuff that I couldn't understand. And I've taken quite a number of photographs in the presence, thankfully, of like 17 or 20 other witnesses. But this particular farm is very unusual. Each of the circles represents a 10-foot burnt ring where over a period of time these things appeared. The 2 rings over to the right, the farmer found he was riding his horse one afternoon. The animal almost bucked him off, and he got down off the animal, started looking around, and here were these 2 burned rings, both the same 10-foot size. And the horse wouldn't go into the area, wouldn't approach it, which is relatively common with horses, cattle, dogs. And over a period of about 6 weeks, all these rings on the left were found. He would have a calf born, and the calf was absolutely healthy. He would leave. The only way into this place is through locked gates, and he keeps all of them secure. And the next morning he would come back, and the mother cow would be standing there, and the only thing left of the calf in each of these cases was the skeleton. There was nothing outside or inside the skeleton. And this guy is 72 years old, and he's as down to earth as any person you'd want to talk to. And he really didn't want to tell me this stuff, but we became pretty good friends. And so finally he said, I want to show you something. And now remember, he's never reported this to anyone but me. And he takes me out behind this large barn, and there was a pile of cow bones that some of you probably could believe if you've been involved in any of the mutilation cases. And I've done very little with mutilations, but it was pretty astonishing stuff. And it doesn't stop there. Where you see the letters G over on the right, Two steel gates were pushed to the ground. Now, again, this farm is locked up tight. They were pushed to the ground. The half-inch steel pins that they pivot on were rotated into the tightening position 90 degrees. And I'm telling you, it would take something to do that. And yet there was no indication on the gates that they'd been impacted by anything. In other words, someone didn't somehow get in there with a truck and slam it into these gates. The same thing happened up on Site 1, which is about 4,000 feet north of this. The very same thing. And where you see the X down in the buildings, a couple in their mid-60s, pillars of the community, one night the wife gets up and the living room is lit up with this orange light. And she looks out the window and she sees a classic saucer with lights around the rim, no sound, descending, and it's descending toward this property. Well, the property owner at that time was in a nursing home in Texas, and they were kind of watching the place for him. So they jump in the pickup truck and they try to follow this thing, and it disappears down into the trees in that area. So the next day at noon, beautiful clear day, they pull up to a point just south of the house. There's an old house and a trailer. And he gets out of the car and he walks up to the trailer to check the door, be sure everything's okay. His wife stays in the car. And she sees him walking from the house toward, or from the trailer toward the house, and suddenly he just disappears. And she's very frightened because he's had some heart problems. And she gets out of the car and she starts running up through these high weeds, yelling at him. And finally he responds very weakly. And as she's approaching him, he's lying face down on the ground. And she said, "Can you get up?" And he said, "I don't know. I'm really hurt." And as she gets up to the point where he's at, she has two impacts to her upper back of her shoulders. And she's knocked to the ground alongside him. He later tells her this had happened to him. And this lady, believe me, it would take a lot to knock her to the ground. And it's totally puzzling because of the impact it would have taken. Again, in a clear, fully sunlit sky, nothing was there. And so he wound up in the hospital for 2 weeks, nearly died because he had a blood clot in the most damaged leg, and they were really fearing for his life. They have never agreed to tell me this story. They want nothing whatsoever to do with it. And this guy, it's interesting, was a coon hunter all his life. So he would go out night after night in the deep woods and all this. And a good friend of mine, who is also a witness over there, is a friend of theirs, and his wife told her about it. And she said that from that point on, this man will not go outside the house at night at all, and rarely goes out in the daytime. And this is a place of great strangeness. Now, I took this photo of a couple of things. There were 14 of us there, fortunately, when this was going on. At this site, if you go there for a week, at some point during that week, you'll see something that you can't explain. It's that active. I have 184 witnesses and just under 500 sightings or 500 events of one kind or another. And everything has happened there with the exception of little guys. They've not had any little people sightings. Now, these things sometimes have been seen. I've not been lucky enough to see this, but they'll appear as a sort of elongated vertically, strange orange color. the ones that I saw, I mean, I stood there. I hate to admit this, but I had a video camera running, and I got 1 minute and 37 seconds of the best gravel shots you've ever seen. We're standing out there, the Site 1 owner and I, and this guy's a banker. He's not, he's not interested, wasn't interested in UFOs. And he and I are standing there talking, and all of a sudden he said, there they are. And there were 3 of these things in a horizontal row, evenly spaced, and the sky was plenty light enough to have seen, for example, if it was a flare with a parachute, if they were attached to anything, whatever. They were just suspended there with no sound and not moving at all. And suddenly another one appears over here and a 5th one here. The 5th one is close. And I'm standing there so awestruck by what I was seeing that I didn't even think about this camera running. And so I got all our conversation and the gravel and everything. And the last 2 or 3 seconds before the 5th one disappeared, I thought of it, brought the camera up, and I got just the last few seconds. But these things, my impression, I think I'd have been all right if it'd been a metal flying saucer, even if it was covered with little green guys, whatever. I would have been shooting video of it. But these things were so totally different from anything I've ever encountered in my life. And my impression, and I almost hate to say this, my impression was that you were looking at a sort of opening or portal, and I fully expected something to come out of them. And the witnesses over there on a great number of occasions have reported smaller objects coming out of these things, and they've actually captured them on video. They've shot a lot of video footage of this stuff. And again, always the video is being shot with 15, 20 people present. Now this is a recreation of an event that took place just the other week. And 2 lawyers from a nearby city went out into the very center of the 3 sites. And of course it would have to be a very old cemetery. But they had heard of all the sightings going on. Now, how they heard about them, I don't know, because all the witnesses I've talked to have never gone public with it. But at any rate, they thought, well, we'll look. They were skeptics, and they were standing out in the cemetery 10 feet apart. And all of a sudden, up in the tree line, they see clusters of these small white globes just sort of playing around and like chasing each other, going up, down, close to the ground, up in the trees. And this went on for 10, 11 minutes. And all of a sudden, 2 of those things break out of the pack and head straight toward the 2 attorneys. As they're coming towards them, at a point about 150 feet from them, one of the 2 objects made a right-angled turn and disappeared into trees off to the east. The second object continues coming directly at them and passed between the 2 witnesses, who are 10 feet apart, at shoulder height, no sound, no wind disturbance, nothing. So they got a really good view, both of them, of this thing. And there have been a huge number of reports of just this kind of thing in that area. So what I'm hoping is eventually to be there with the camera at the right time and record some of this stuff. This is a 10-foot ring that was found at Site 1 following the observation of a bright white circular object. And there was no burning, no dehydration. The thing was swirled and packed very tightly to the ground. The central area was unaffected. And the interesting thing there was that 3 weeks after this happened, the ring is located in the middle of a 12-foot aisle, they call it, which is simply 2 barbed wire fences, and they use this as a corridor to drive cattle between fields. Well, the property owner had to move his cattle to another field, and the only way there was up this aisle by this ring. Well, there is only one area where you could go through there without touching the ring, and that's about a 1.5 foot area on the east side between the fence and the ring. As they started the cattle up through there, the cattle balked and started tearing at the fence, and they refused to cross this thing. So they backed up, regrouped, and started driving the cattle through one at a time. And I have photographs where the cattle, 166 cows, went by this ring and not one ever touched it. 166 maintained that one little path. So what animals are getting from this, I don't know. This is one of the 10-foot burned rings at that site number 3. Also, site number 2. The property owner and 2 of his friends are watching TV one night, and all of a sudden the 1/4 inch thick glass on the front of the stereo cracked right down the middle vertically with a tremendous noise. Scared the daylights out of them. They jumped up and they ran over to check this glass, and at that point outside in back of the house an even louder crash. And they ran outside, and there they found this pickup truck, which had been brought to this driveway that afternoon. It had no engine. They had the thing locked in gear. It had oversized wide tread tires, and the truck was locked up. And yet it had been pushed 12 feet down this gravel driveway, leaving deep trenches where the wheels were not turning. And what it would take to move this truck 12 feet would be incredible, because 5 of us couldn't move it at all. And as it went down the driveway, it had the tow bar still attached, and the tow bar fell horizontally and went through the garage door. And the tow bar then flew 20 feet across the garage. So it's very interesting, the cases of this force, whatever it may be. This is Slovakia. Down to the lower right is the city of Levice. Up at the upper left is a brand new nuclear power plant. It's the pride of Slovakia. It had just gone online about a week before this event, and this was April 27th of 2001. And some Slavic friends of mine ran into the apartment I was staying in, and very excited, and they said just on national Slavic television they had shown a video of an object flying in over their new nuclear plant and hovering. And they were so excited about this, and they were describing it, said it was orange, circular, and pretty large, and very bright. And so immediately I had my friend call the director of Slavic National Television in the hopes of getting a copy of this video. And the director told him that he would try to get an okay and would be glad to give me a copy. Of course, in the meantime, he called back 2 days later to say there'd be no copy. The military had picked up the video, and that was the end of that. But immediately I drove to Levice and went into the city, and most of the younger folks in Slovakia can speak some English, and everyone I talked to was very well aware of this sighting. And actually a lot of the people in Levice saw it from the distance. And they wouldn't give me a lot of information. They're leery of talking too much. But they all suggested that I talk to the village major. And that would be the Russian in charge of the village or the town or whatever. So I went to see him, and he had a secretary that could speak pretty good English. And I told her what I was trying to do. I wanted more information on this. And she told him, and he gets this really big smile. And he's rattling off a bunch of stuff. And she said, the major said to tell you where you can find the people that know all about this event, the scientists that know all about it. And she gave me very specific directions to where they were located, which was simply out the door, up a long hill, and a left turn across from the hospital. And so I drive up there, and I make the left turn, and there is this great sprawling cemetery. And so that was enough. That said plenty. But I was stupid enough to drive out to this power plant. They're very leery about people coming around this. And this is the flight path of the object. It came in from the left in a descending mode over the old stacks. They said it almost hit the second of those two tall towers on the main control structure. And it stopped less than 20 feet above the active stack there and hovered for 10 minutes and then ascended vertically until it was out of sight. Now, obviously, what happened is it started coming in. It triggered all the security video cameras all over this plant, and they shot it from every conceivable angle. So you can only imagine what kind of video we'd have there. But it's probably not to be. And you know, I've not seen one thing in the media about that case. Now, my biggest, bestest project, Alan Hynek and I met a man in 1970 named Antonin T. Hurok. And Tony was a Czech engineer. He had 4 degrees from Czech and Slavic universities. He was the son of very wealthy parents, and they owned a vast property in the north of the Czech Republic, then called Bohemia. And for a long time, I didn't know there was such a place as Bohemia. I thought that was just in New York. They had the Bohemians. But anyway, when the Nazis came through in 1939, they arrested all of the, most of the males, and especially if they were business people. They arrested Tony and they put him in a concentration camp called Thymwall. And he was there from 1939 until he escaped in 1941. And when he escaped, he got word to his wife, Anna, and she came to join him in Slovakia, and there he joined the Slovakian underground uprising. As time went on, by 1944, he was a captain, and he was in a battalion of 184 men, and they had a huge ground skirmish with the Germans, and they were all severely injured, mostly killed, except for Tony and 2 soldiers named Martin and Urich. The Germans left them for dead. This was October of 1944. And Tony was unconscious, and when he came to, he was being treated by a tall Slavic man who introduced himself as Slavic. And Martin had been seriously injured from artillery fragments. And Urich had a very bad thigh wound. So the Slovakian sheepman treated them, built a stretcher, and guided and carried them into the high Tatra Mountains on a 4-hour-long journey through the high snow. And they arrived at what he called a low cranny, a small cave entrance, and which was concealed by rocks. Slavic removed the rocks, took the men in to the cave, where it opened up into a pretty roomy cavern. And Tony's diary, which is the most fascinating read, goes on to say that suddenly Slavic became ceremonious. He started doing the holy rites on himself, on Hurak and his men, on the cave, and on a hole going on back. And as he was getting ready to leave, he asked Tony, who was the healthiest of the three men, to please not go into his cavern, because his grandfather and father had taken him into it many years before, and that it was full of poisonous air, deep pits, and was haunted. So after he left, Tony, having been involved in mines, they owned several uranium mines, interested in the underground, decided that he should explore this passage that went on back. And not only that, they hadn't eaten for 4 days. And so they were thinking bats. How good does that sound? Well, before I get to the discovery, this area I have found, I've been over there twice, and I've traveled thousands of kilometers trying to backtrack the path of Tony Hurak to establish if what he was saying is true, and thus far it has proven true. And in these explorations in the Slovakian National Archives and at the Kesmarok Castle, which is a museum repository for artifacts, I found a manuscript that describes this area, this mountain, which coincidentally is located only about a mile from where the cave is located. And in 1663, a large circular object crashed into that mountain. When it did so, it destroyed homes and buildings as far away as Poprad, which was 45 miles. The villagers got up the courage, went up on the mountain, and they brought back, they said, big pieces, large pieces of this thing. And they buried them near a small village at the foot of the Tatras. Now, unfortunately, I had not had this translated while I was there, or I would have been directly to that small village with a metal detector. But they buried them there in 1663, and within days, people in that area started becoming quite ill, and the illness spread over a considerable area. And the effects of the illness was the losing of hair, great blisters on their skins, sounds like radiation, perhaps. So that's one of the odd things that's the manuscript part of it that I found there. And this is Tony. This is a passport photo in 1951, his wife Anna. Now, when he went into the cave, when he went on back, in his diary he describes it, he said, after following a not too devious path for an hour and a half, he later told me when I talked with him in 1970, it was about 2 miles into the cavern. He came onto a long level corridor passage, which ended at a crawl. And as he got down on his stomach and crawled through this thing, as he came out into a larger room, this is what he saw, the dark object there. Now what this is an actual direct copy that I made in 70 of 2 pages of his diary. These sketches were done in 1944 while he was in the artifact area and inside the artifact. Now that's what he could see across the room from this crawlway. And this thing is about, as you see it, the dark area is about 17 feet high and about 9 feet across. And as you can see the arrow pointing to a darker strip, he noticed immediately that there was a sort of crack coming down the outer part of the wall. And as he went to this, he could see that it was possible perhaps to get through the wall by wriggling through this crack. But it is tight. For Ted to go through there, it would be weeks of slim fast. But he was determined, and he was fascinated, because if you notice, around the outer edge, the stalagmites and the stalactites and flowstone formations had formed on the outer wall of the structure. So pretty quickly you can see this was not old, it was very old. And the research that I've done in all these years actually indicates that it was there prior to the developing of the cave. And as most of us know, it takes a long time for a cavern to develop. Then following the development of the cavern, the development very, very slowly of the formations and the flowstone deposits. So at any rate, he decides to try to go through this crack. And his descriptions of his attempts are really jewels to read. It was so tight he couldn't get through with his clothes on. So he goes in without his clothes. And all he had was a carbide light and some torches. And where the crack goes through the wall, there is on the other side about 40-degree incline. And so it kept pulling him into it and hanging him up on stalagmites that had developed in the floor of this. So he had some pretty desperate times. He tried it several times and finally had to go back to the entrance room and get some grease and take it back, smear it all over his body, and then he sort of slid through with a good deal of body damage. Now, what you're seeing here is the outer wall of the structure. At the top of the slope is where the crack begins, and you can see the little divide as it goes down the incline. That outer wall measured 7 feet in thickness. It is a black, shiny, satiny, silky, steel-like material. He actually, at points during the week that they were hidden in the cave, fired his military rifle at the wall, to try to chip out a piece, because his pickaxe wouldn't even touch it. And all he got with the bullet was incredible amount of noise and green sparks and a pungent odor. But the bullet didn't phase this stuff. And as he finally made it into it, he went through the wall, rolled all the way down this limestone deposit down to the lower cusp of one of the points in the back of this. And the structure itself goes up, as you can see, the back wall, the front wall, at about a 16-degree off a vertical angle. He was never able to see the top portion of whatever this was. And he took in long poles, he took in many torches, tried everything to light that area, and it went on and on. So he started chipping away at the lower section of this, where this limestone deposit is at. And as he chips away, he goes through about 60 inches of loose limestone deposit. Normally, on the average, that would be 6,000 years in the deposit inside this object that has cave formations on the outside of it. As he gets to what appears to be the bottom of this limestone deposit, he finds the remains of a very large animal. And he takes 3 of the teeth of this animal and takes them out with him. And thankfully, before he died, he gave me those 3 teeth. He gave me the carbide light that he used in the cavern. And the teeth were identified after the war in Uzhhorod, Ukraine, as prehistoric cave bear. So we have a 6,000-year deposit underneath which we find a cave bear. The last one that we know of was killed 11,000 years ago, but most of them date back 100,000 or more years. Inside this thing, obviously couldn't have gone through the crack because these guys were like 20 feet long, and they were massive. Then it gets more interesting. The bear remains are lying on this wavy constructed grill work, as he described it, wavy constructed grill work, which went on down far below his vision. He put his ear and cheek to this grill work, and he could feel heat coming up from below, and he could hear the sound of what he described as a very, very large turbine running. Now, this was in 1944, and this is a man who thoroughly knew the underground, and he knew all the sounds and how you can be deceived by those sounds. I've explored caves since I was 14, and I've heard people sitting in a dark room that were talking that were not even there. So it can happen. But this guy, and he tried it several times because at first he didn't believe it. But he told us, you know, he said something was running down there. And it sounded like it was quite a distance away. Now, well, here we go. The limestone deposit, cave bear remains, and the wavy pattern. Now, this is the configuration of this thing he called the moon shaft, the artifact. 27 feet wide, curve of the back wall 85 feet, pretty good size. And again, this is a view if you were looking from the top down through it, like a large crescent moon, or a fat crescent moon. Now, it became more interesting because as I did research over there, and I developed a close friendship with a scientist and author in Poland, this man's mother-in-law had been arrested by the Nazis in 1939. When the Nazis took over Czechoslovakia and Poland, Hitler sent in the SS, and the SS was there in Poland to construct an enormous test site. And this thing evidently would be quite comparable to what we call Area 51 today. They tested circular aircraft. They tested their most advanced weapons, and his mother-in-law was working forced labor, and she actually saw a number of this saucer-shaped craft on the ground. And God love her, she had a little camera, and she also had the guts to take pictures. Of course, it would have been instant death if she had been caught. And as luck would have it, about 3 years ago, my friend was going through his mother-in-law's effects in her home, and he stumbled onto a little underground storage area, a piece of the floor that would come up, and there he finds this little camera and some film. And the old black and white film, 1,000 years from now, you could still use it. And sure enough, all these negatives were on this film. And so that's one of the things I'm looking into over there. And a very great interest is, and when this site, this Area 51, was put in effect, it is within spitting distance of the Tatra Mountains and the cave location. And they actually fired some of their super secret missiles into the Tatra Mountains in that area. But of greater interest, Hitler, of course, as most of you know, had a great interest in the occult and into things like the underworld. And he sent in with Himmler a team of special SS people, trained speleologists, to look for entrances to the underworld on a mountain in Poland not far from the cave area, and also to look for the cave of the half moon. This was 1939. Tony Hurok discovers it in 1944. Well, they didn't find the cave of the half moon, but that doesn't matter. What tweaks my interest is how did they know about it? How could they possibly have known 5 years before he found it? And it's for sure that Slavik, his father or grandfather, would not have told anyone, especially the Nazis. So there are a lot of things that come into play more and more. One of the developers of this UFO crawler just sent me a book that I had heard about called the Brotherhood of the Bell. And in hearing about it, I always thought it was, like Shriners Club or something. And it's pretty interesting stuff. I read part of it while I watched it snow in Denver. But this thing goes a lot of different directions. And every time I had the opportunity to get back over there, you come up with more and more information. This is a view from the cave area looking west. It is kind of rugged country, especially for an old guy. And so it's becoming more and more important. This is one of the cave bear teeth that I have. Oh, another oddity over there within spitting distance of the cave is a series of these large stone balls. And they are very close to what the locals call the Wall of the Giants, an 8-foot thick wall, which purportedly was constructed by fusing the stones together with tremendous heat. And it stretches from the cave area all the way down to the south border of Slovakia. And that's something else I plan to check on when I get back. Now this is sort of the layout of the cave, the 1663 Christ site, north end of the Wall of Giants, the Stone Ball area, the Nazi test area, all in pretty close proximity. And this is the cave area denoted there, the 1663 Christ site, and the edge of the Nazi test site. And this is a closer upper of the 1663 and the cave area. The only route that I've found in there thus far is a 7-hour walk. And the last time I was over there, the first 2 times that I walked back in there, coming from America and McDonald's, I could only make about 150 feet and I'd have to rest. So that 7-hour walk became very long. It's illegal to go into any cave in Slovakia. So you have to do your 7 hours at night. And that's especially fun because it's a pretty treacherous country. My big plan when I go back to finish this thing off, first of all, when I reach the artifact, my plan is to start very quietly taking in teams of 2 or 3 scientists at a time so they can do whatever they can do in situation, because it ain't coming out. This thing is 2,700 feet below the mountaintop, 2 miles back from the cave entrance. So that's a lot of material. You're not going to go in there and move it, and you'd destroy the thing probably if you tried to. So it'll have to be studied where it lies. And my plan is to try to work with the Slavic government this time. The Russians are slowly but surely pulling out of the country, and they actually have people in government you can talk to. And imagine what this would mean for Slovakia. I mean, this would be an archaeological find that could only greatly help the economy of the country. And Tony Hurok was very aware of what would happen if it was discovered by, as he put it, tomb robbers. And he didn't want to destroy the purity of the area, inflict that on the people that live in the area. And so as he came out of the cave, out of the artifact for the last time, as Martin had died and they were going to rejoin their battalion near Kosiska, as he came out, he concealed 3 crawlways between the entrance and the artifact. And he assured me that no one, if they did find the cave, would ever find the artifact. But fortunately, he also gave me a very detailed map of the cave showing where the concealed passages are. So we have one up on anyone else. And it's interesting, in 1981, the Russians launched a big project to try to find this. And they've even communicated with me, suggesting that we could work together. And And so I pondered this suggestion. They said, could we work together? And I acted like I was pondering it for about 2 weeks. And I emailed the scientists back. And I said, if I were looking for this thing, here are the coordinates where I would look. And of course, what I gave him are the roughest parts of the Tatras and as far away from this thing as you could get. So there are probably a number of injured or dead Russian soldiers up in that area still trying to find it. But National Geographic has expressed interest in doing a documentary. Problem there is you have the funding to get back there, but they have total control of anything and everything they do. And I have no interest in turning this into some big public event. Let the Slavic government do that after research has been done on this thing. And if they want to, they can't possibly open it to the public, it's too rough. But if they want to go public with it, then it would be up to them. Until that point, I would like to see it in the hands of the scientific community so it could be studied. And I also promise you guys will know about it. Yes. We have started 2 new, well, this is another lower shot. I would recommend this book for reading. You won't believe all of it and shouldn't, but there's some things in that are real interesting. And this is the hinge, purportedly what the Nazis built to contain the bell because they didn't know really how to control it. And this is still standing over there in Germany. Now, you know what? I forgot to put the important slide on. You might want to jot this down. I have a new website, actually 2 new websites, and compliments of IBM, and they are, in just a second, yeah. They are UFO trace cases, all one word, .com, .net, .org, whichever. And the second site, which is just starting, just under development, is Moonshaft Artifact, one word, .com. And right now they're working on a 3-dimensional virtual view of the artifact, so you'll be able to see it from all angles and in it and so on. It's a difficult thing to explain and difficult to understand from these sketches. So I think you'll find that a very great interest. But on the UFO Trace Cases website, I'm posting very high credibility, high strangeness trace landing cases in great detail with images and so on. I have a section on a subterranean artifact in Slovakia, which is some of the stuff. And then I have the SIU. And the Sci-Fi Channel gave us the idea for this. We were in the running to do a television series with Sci-Fi, which would involve a team of investigators going out and investigating UFO cases. And Ghost Hunters is their #1 show. And so they were patterning this after the Ghostbusters, or Ghost Hunters show. And so they talked to us for quite a long while. Nothing came of it. So we got the idea, okay, we've got the team, so let's just do something. So we call it the Special Investigations Unit. And I'm posting almost daily posts on our activity at this active Missouri site, any project that we work on. So what you'll be able to do is go to that site, and it'll be changing almost daily, and virtually go with us on investigative trips, because we'll have streaming video and we'll have digital images posted within hours of the trip. So you might find that of interest. Now, I have a short video which has some short clips from the Missouri site, and they have taken some really magnificent images of some of the aerial displays, and these are 3 or 4 of the best, and that's followed by a short video on the Slovakian project. And what that does, it's just a fast group of clips, a little kind of introduction tour of Slovakia, and then some video from inside the cave. So if we can get that. Yeah. As you can see, some of these things have been seen in pretty bright light. Now this was a daylight sighting 2 objects, and there is a second object when you run this slow-mo underneath the most conspicuous object, and it suddenly reverses direction and flies off in the opposite direction. And these things, if you look at them in an enhanced view, are saucer-shaped with a dome at the top and the bottom. And it's nothing over there to see 8 or 12 of these things just like that in a row, vertically, diagonally. Now there were 17 witnesses to this event. The things actually flew almost right at the camera. Yeah, that'd be my guess. Probably be thinking Spielberg if you watch it's hard. It's quite a country. It's an absolutely magnificent place. And it's a fun place to take a walk. Now this is an anomaly. Before I found what I believe to be the cave, there was an area we'd pass through and everything that was battery powered would just die. And so I measured this thing out with the compass reaction, and it's about 25 feet in diameter, and I laid all those instruments there at the edge of it, backed the camera out, put it on telephoto so it would continue to run, and they're 2-second pulses. There's some kind of electromagnetic, that's the entrance, and from the inside. But some sort of electromagnetic activity. Perhaps Tony's turbine. And when I finally found the this cave that I'm reasonably sure is the cave, the area I've explored does go back toward that 25-foot area. So. This actually has some really great audio, but I thought I better drop most of it. It'd make Don Imus look like Walt Disney. You got to remember, this was a high-stress project at this point. Now, finally, this is where a lot of the bombing damage occurred, and I finally wound up having to go down in this. Two of the Slavics lowered me down head first on a rope down so I could see that it was going on. It was a pleasant experience. So what has to be done in this area, it has to be shored up. And I didn't have the funds or the time to. In 1970, Jackie Gleason was going to fund my trip over there. And Tony was in contact with 4 of his friends in Prague. And they were to meet me and get me the equipment supplies that I needed to get on into the Tatras. And the Russians in '68 had invaded Czechoslovakia. And before I could get over there, they arrested and killed all 4 of these contacts. And then in '81 initiated their own projects, so I don't know. But it's very important, and I'm trying to get the funding to get back there. And if I do, then be sure and go to that website, and you'll have daily entries. You can go with me. Thanks very much.
Yeah, I wanted to. I was curious about the electromagnetic phenomena, and was that near the cave? And then did you did you have to use film for the filming of that, or was that just a separate area, and you could run your normal video cameras in the cave area?
Yeah, this, as best I could determine, it was an almost round area, but there were some irregularities, which you could trace, obviously, with the compasses and so on. And so I decided, well, how am I going to shoot this? Because walkie-talkies won't work, the camera won't work, you know. So I backed the instruments over just to the edge, right at the edge. And then I put the video camera on a tripod, jacked it way up, and put it on telephoto and shot from outside, and it worked. As soon as you bring the camera into that area, of course, it'd just go dead as a rock.
But that's separate from the cave area?
Well, no. At that time, I had no idea, well, a general area where the cave might be. But I was doing kind of grid searches up and down the mountain, which is great fun. And 3 days after I filmed this, I was going down this one grid line and nearly fell into the entrance of the cave. Otherwise, I would not have found it. It's so small, and it's down in a kind of depression, and it's almost impossible to see. And so, of course, as I was able to get into the cave, some distance back to this big fall-in area. I was surveying it, and when I mapped that out, it was generally running in the direction of this anomaly. And the anomaly area was, if I remember right, about 800 or so feet from the end of the surveyed part of the cave. Now, how the cave went in between, I don't know. But it's interesting, and it's certainly an anomaly because there's nothing up there. I mean, to tell you, the only thing on this mountain are wild boars, which really like people, and very large bears who also like people. Yeah, it is a friendly place. And the really fun part, guys, is, number one, I, like most people, hate snakes, really hate snakes. In that country, at least in that region, they run in packs. Now, it's bad enough to see one, but I don't know how many times I would see coming out of the brush 8 or 10 of these 5-foot-long snakes. And if they hit you, you got 4 hours. And it's a 7-hour walk out, so you can do the math on that pretty easily. Yeah.
Yes, I'm wondering if you've seen any consistency in your physical traces, so that if you saw a certain swirl in the grass or something, you could say, I've seen this 3 times and it's always connected with an orange ball of light or anything like that?
That is good. That's good. And that's one of the things obviously I forgot, but I always try to present, is the fact that specific types of objects that land, or nearly land, generate specific types of traces, effects. And it actually reached a point in the 70s where I could go into a case and talk to the witnesses without knowing anything about the site, and with their description of the object, what it looked like, what it did, and so on. Before I even went to the site, I had a really good idea of what I would find. They're that consistent, yeah.
Okay, and along that line, I'm wondering if you've ever shared any information with Nancy Talbot of Crop Circle fame, since she looks at formations, and I think she's connected orange or light orbs with these sometime.
That's kind of a delicate thing.
Okay.
No, that's fine. I've tried really several times to work with Talbot, and we have such great divisions. It hasn't worked out.
She's a strong woman.
She is a strong woman, yes. Yes, she is. And you, yeah, that's, yeah. But,
Never mind.
no. My problem with trying to establish that crop circles are effects generated by a UFO is there has not been a single crop circle found, at least to my knowledge, where an object was seen at close range, a structured vehicle device generating that effect. Whereas with the trace cases, we know they're UFO effects because we've got 3,189 cases from 91 countries where the object is seen generating that effect. Another big difference is, and all this I'm putting on the website, the number of landing sites, and the primary configuration of the landing sites is circular, but the majority of those are like from 1 meter to 4 meters in diameter. And the numbers of cases diminishes with the growth in size. So by the time you get out here to a crop circle size thing, you have no UFO reports. And I don't know. I've had two friends that investigated crop circles for many, 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 many years, and they arrived at the conclusion that they're man-made. I don't know, but they're so radically different in every way from a typical landing site. You know, believe me, I have no problem with anyone investigating crop circles. It's just, let's don't rush in and say they are generated by UFOs. I mean, we could drop the Loch Ness Monster into a landing site and say it was his fault. You know, I just think, you know, we need to be careful. The water is so muddy now with all these things.
Do you have any evidence about the bottom side of a UFO being cold?
You know, it's interesting you'd mention that, because, in fact, one of the types of cases I really like are levitation cases, where people, animals, automobiles are levitated off the ground, in some cases pretty high off the ground. There was a Russian woman that was elevated 160 feet, they estimated, in full sight of an entire complement of factory workers, and was suspended underneath the object. And that was a case Valet got in Russia. And in a lot of the, or quite a number of the people cases, when they are drawn up toward these things, they have this bone-chilling cold. And in several instances, the area below their body would be very hot, and above and down, freezing cold. Yeah, absolutely. And that's interesting. The levitation cases, you don't see a lot said about those things, but there are some great reports in there. I've devised a secondary catalog just of the levitations. Some startling stuff.
Yeah, one other question. Have you ever had a sense of feeling that somebody is interested in the work you do, either earthly or unearthly?
Well, I've never, not unearthly.
Or aware of it, or following it in any way?
Well, I tell you, I have been contacted by a group that, and I mean, it's a group of scientists and engineers that pretty impressive. And they're wanting different types of trace data to try to retro-construct an object. I mean, like you've heard that before, but these people actually even have Department of Defense and CIA and fairly high folks. And so anyway, I'm pondering if I want to get into it. The problem is I wouldn't be able to talk about it. You have to sign your life away. And I was offered a job by Bob Bigelow, and he was going to give me his office in Vegas. And as we neared the completion of the deal, he said, "How are you going to approach this?" And I said, "Well, I'll pull the information in from all the various sources I have, and then probably send out like a monthly update to all these people so they can see what's going on and what we're doing." And he said, no, it only comes in. And so I lost what could have been a very well-paying job. But I don't believe in that. You know, I believe anything that you find should be shared. And that's the way you collect more information and try to get a complete picture of what's going on. So.
One quick question. I've always been a big fan of Carl Sagan, grew up on him, and SETI. I still don't understand. We have all this evidence that we have these little critters landing and examining us, but SETI keeps saying that they still haven't received any contact. Do you have any light on that?
Well, my take on that would be one word, and that would be funding. See, as soon as you make the big discovery, that's it. It'll all go to different places. And there won't be any more or as much searching. But Sagan, the interesting thing about Sagan was that privately he had great interest in UFOs. He'd go on the Carson show and say it's all bunk, which made me really resent Sagan because he could have helped the cause greatly. And as a matter of fact, I was at the towards the end of the Joe Firmage's funding that I had. Firmage put Sagan's wife and I together, and we were working on some projects together. And she was very open to a lot of things too. So it was sad because I don't know, fear of ridicule from his, yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.